I have a video lecture here for you on the external anatomy of dogs and cats. You do have a word list that it gives a definition of all the different body parts. There's also diagrams in there that show you those as well. On the diagram, there are some extra terms. So things like, I'm just looking at the diagram right now, things like loin is in there, and that withers, pastern. We don't really use those terms too often, so those aren't in our word list. So for study purposes, focus on the word list over those picture diagrams. I also included for you a practice activity that is a diagram of a dog for you to label the external body parts, and it does have an answer key in there as well for that. So on your test, oh shoot, I'll get back to you on your test. Usually there's a diagram. I need to make sure that I can put that into the bright space. But right now what I want to do is just show you guys and go over those external body parts. So again, I've got my little stuffy dog to show you on. So these words are just in alphabetical order, so I'm just going to go top to bottom. And then if you feel like it's easier to arrange things like nose to tail or something like that, by all means, feel free to rearrange your list. So for study purposes for this, I encourage you, if you have a stuffy, to do this on a stuffy. If you have a real animal, even better, practice on your real animal. And you could also practice on yourself, right? So you have a body, you could picture your body generally as a dog or a cat, right? Use your body to study as well, because you can bring that with you into the test, right? And then you have your study aid right there with you. So our first term is axilla. Axilla is the medical term for the armpit. So right in there, that armpit area is the axilla. So the formal definition is ventral to where, so ventral means towards the belly, to where the forelimb attaches to the body. So that's that armpit area. So axilla is the armpit. Our next word is the carpus. So remember, carp in your word parts, carp was the root word for wrist. So on the forelimb, it's just that little bendy part right there, the wrist. This isn't a super anatomically correct dog. We have way better ones at school. I had to make do with what I had here. But that's the carpus, is just that little wrist area on the dog. So the next is the cheek. So cheek, just like us, is the fleshy portion on either side of the face. So it forms the sides of the mouth and continues rostrally. So remember, rostrally is a term on the head, meaning towards the nose. So it goes rostrally right to the lips, okay? So basically, it's all this stuff right here that you could kind of pinch and pick up on the dog, okay? Our next term is chest. So the chest is the part of the body between the neck and the abdomen. So right there, right this whole space right here. So the chest is also sometimes called the thorax as well. So chest is kind of more of a common term. Thorax is more of the medical term. Next we have the chin. So the chin, the formal definition is the rostroventral protrusion of the mandible. So what does that mean? So the mandible is the lower jaw. The lower jaw, the mandible, is the only movable bone in the skull. It's the only part of the skull that can move. The protrusion means something that sticks out. Rostroventral, so rostro means towards the nose, ventral means towards the belly. So, I mean, this guy has a really severe overbite, so his chin is actually way over here. But let's use this puppy. His rostroventral chin is going to be right there. So that's that part underneath, similar to our chin. So our next term is dew claw. The dew claw is the rudimentary first digit of cats and dogs. So dew claws are like their little kind of thumb thing that sticks up out here. So they've got 1, 2, 3, 4 toes down here and a dew claw up here. Usually, sometimes they're removed, especially in small dogs. I find they like to remove the front ones. In the hind legs, typically animals don't have dew claws. Some dogs do. Sometimes they're removed if they're really floppy and dangly. Other times they're left in place if they're pretty firmly attached. But we'll often remove them while an animal's having a spay or neuter surgery, especially if they are really loose, because they'll get caught on things and then torn off. And it's a lot harder to heal a trauma injury, like a tearing, versus a surgical injury. Okay, so often those will be removed. So dew claws in the hind, not nearly as common as in the front. There are some breeds that are prone to them. They have them a lot, like Samoyeds, for instance. Will sometimes even have 2 or 3 back there. So that's the dew claw. Next we have the elbow. So the elbow joint, pretend this guy has an elbow joint. It's that one right there. That would bend just like ours. Next we have the flank. I'm going to show you flank on this puppy. The flank is the side of the body. It's between the ribs, so the end of the ribs, and the ilium, I-L-I-U-M. So if you remember, the I-L-I-U-M is the hip bone. So it's just the side of the abdomen there is the flank. Next we have the forehead. The forehead is just the portion between the eyes and the ears. So kind of similar to us, like above our eyes. And then next we have the hock. So this guy actually has a nice hock joint. So right there is the hock. Dogs and cats are really interesting in that, so the hock is the equivalent of our ankle bone. But when dogs are standing, right, they're standing like this. They've got definitely that like dog leg look to their leg. That's because they walk on their tippy toes only. So they're on their tippy toes, this is their ankle, this is their knee, and then up here is their hip. So they just use their feet a little bit differently, whereas our foot is entirely flat on the ground all the way up to that hock. If an animal's walking on their hocks, that's like a sign of illness. So typically they're up on their tiptoes. So hock is the tarsal joint, that's another word for it. So it's like the equivalent to our ankle, and it's that little kind of hook that they have at the back of their leg. Our next term is the inguinal region. So the inguinal region is the groin. So it's right where the hind limb attaches to the body. So the inguinal is like the opposite of the axilla as the armpit. So it'd be like, I guess, the leg pit, the groin. Okay, so our next term is muzzle. So the muzzle is basically everything that a muzzle would cover if we were putting a muzzle on this dog. So it includes the nostrils, it includes all like around the lips and everything, the muscles of the lips. So this whole area is the muzzle. What if though you have an animal like a pug? So where they're brachycephalic, they have that shortened face. So if you have an animal like that, it's still the same definition of muzzle. It's just not long, right? So it's still going to be the lips and the nose. It's just kind of squashed. So picture one of those pugs, a fawn pug, where they're like the brown and they've got the black face, or like the light tan and the black face. Basically, that black face is kind of highlighting where their muzzle is. So the pinna is the word for like the external ear flaps. So it's everything outside of the ear is the pinna. Then we have the rump. So the rump is right above the tail, right where the tail attaches. The definition is sacral to the tail head region of the back. The sacrum is just the very lowest vertebrae before the tail starts. So I always say, think of the rump as like that part, you know, if you guys have cats, you like to pet your cats, they always try to push their rumps into your hand. They like little smacks on their, little spanks on their bums. That is the rump area. That's the rump. So the shoulder is up here. It's where the arm attaches to the shoulder blade. So right there is the shoulder, right up here. So the shoulder is the most proximal joint on the forelimb. Then we have back here again in the hind limb, the stifle joint. So the formal definition here is the femorotibial joint. This bone here would be the femur. This one is the tibia and fibula. So the femorotibial joint is here. So it's the equivalent of our knee joint, but it is incorrect to call it a knee in a dog or cat. We want to call it the stifle. Then we have the tail. I think everyone knows a tail. And that is all the anatomy terms, the external anatomy terms. So I have also on your word list 3 other terms, and they're all describing the head of an animal. So the first one is brachycephalic. So if we use our word parts to break that down, we know that ic as the suffix is meaning related to or pertaining to. Cephal means the head, and brachy means short. So basically we're saying like a short head, a short face. So those are like your brachycephalic breeds are things like bulldogs and pugs and like your French bulldogs and Pekingese, Himalayan cats where they have the squishy face, Persians. So any of your squishy face animals are your brachycephalics. The opposite of that, so a really long-nosed dog, think like a Doberman or a Greyhound or a Dachshund. Those guys are dolichocephalic, so it means a long nose. And then right in the middle there, we've got the mesocephalic. So meso just means like middle. Those are things like beagles, golden retrievers, where they have a long nose, but it's not exceptionally long the way like a greyhound would be. So those three terms are referring to shapes of the head. So I'll just go over again quickly those terms, maybe head to tail this time. So we talk about the muzzle. The muzzle is everything kind of that we can put our hand over here. We have our, well, on this guy, he's really has an overbite, but his chin's way down here. But on a normal dog, it would be up here, a chin. Then we've got our forehead region over the eyes and before the ears. We have the ear flaps, which are the pinna. So that covers everything on the head. So moving more caudal towards the tail, we'll talk about our forelimb first, okay? So the most proximal joint of the forelimb is the shoulder. Then we move more distal or more distant along the limb. We have our elbow, so that's the one that bends up here. And then lastly, we have the wrist, and that's the one that bends down here. Or not the wrist, sorry, the carpus, the carpus. Then if we talk about the hind limb, our most proximal joint is the hip. We don't really have that on our word list, which is okay. The next joint moving more distal is the stifle, which is the equivalent of our knee. And then our next most distal joint is the hock. Then if we talk about our body, up here we have the chest. So between the neck and the end of the ribs or the start of the abdomen, we have our chest area, chest. And then maybe I'll show this actually on this guy. I feel like he's a little bit easier to see. So neck to abdomen right here is the chest. And then end of the ribs to start of the hip, that's the flank. So it's the side of the abdomen. The abdomen is just everything down here, like the belly portion down here. Oh, I missed up here the axilla. That's the armpits. The opposite of the axilla is the inguinal region, so down here in the groin. And then, of course, lastly, we have our cute little tail. So that's your external body parts of cats and dogs. I hope this video is helpful for you to visualize those. Like I said, I really encourage you to study them with your own animals. They'll like getting the scritchy scratches from you while you're going ahead and naming all the different parts. And I find being able to actually do it, to sit and quiz yourself and do it with your animal, it tends to stick a little bit better in your head because you have that body memory then. Okay, so I hope this video was helpful. If you do have any questions, make sure you definitely ask, okay? Thank you, bye.